People, today we are going to be talking about the gear that you need as a new photographer, and we're going to go through all the gear that I currently use and all the gear that I've used up until this point. Let's jump straight into it. A couple of weeks back, me and Hamish did a car photography talk where we discussed everything that a new photographer might be wondering about camera gear, shoots, and how to get shoots and all that kind of stuff. We also discussed what you should be thinking about when buying a new camera. But I thought in this video, I would show you all the camera gear that I've owned in the past, what I currently use, and how I made up my mind in picking that camera gear. Let's jump straight into it with the first camera that I ever bought, which was the Nikon D3200, which was my first entry into having a camera that allowed me to shoot in manual and actually learn photography in general. So you can control the shutter speed, the aperture, and the ISO. This was one of the most important things for me when purchasing this first camera. The camera only set me back about £300 in 2012. I learned pretty much everything I know now from using this camera and just experimenting repetitively over and over again, taking a photo, either looking at it and being happy or not being happy, and just repeating it over and over again till I eventually understood the exposure triangle, shutter speeds, apertures, ISO, and how they all work together to give you a good looking photo. When I first picked up this camera, it actually came with the 18 to 55mm kit lens, which allowed me to really experience zooming in and out with a full camera setup. I'd never had that experience before. I'd only ever used one of those little digital cameras that had the built-in lens. So this lens was great. It shoots really wide, and also by zooming in to 55mm, you could actually zoom in a fair bit. Obviously nothing compared to a true telephoto lens, but starting out, you couldn't really go wrong. This leads on to my second lens. So when I first started doing photography, I didn't really know what it was that I wanted to shoot. I was just going out and about with my camera, taking photos of flowers, insects, trees, and anything that I could find either in my garden or up the road, which led me on to buying this lens here. This is the Sigma 105 macro lens. This lens allowed me to shoot nice close-ups of insects, and it was also a pretty good portraiture lens as well. Don't quote me on this because I'm not a macro photographer, but I believe this lens, if you were shooting a postage stamp, it would fill up the entire image. So it was really good for macro photography, but it wasn't very good for the other stuff. I soon realised that if I wanted to take photos of people, I had to stand so far away. I mean, we're not even talking a little bit either. We're talking, if I want to take a photo of my camera, I would probably have to stand all the way back here somewhere just so that I could fit it all in. Because the camera, the D3200, is a crop sensor, this lens was even more zoomed in than it would be on a full frame camera, which is what led me on to getting my next lens, which was the Nifty 50. The 50mm lens, or the Nifty 50 as it's often called, is one of the best lenses for new photographers who are just starting out learning photography. This lens is great for portraiture because it shoots at a large aperture, so it goes down to or up to 1.8, which is incredibly wide, and it gets all of that nice depth in your photos, that really nice bokeh, as it's called, that nice dreamy blur around your photos. This lens allows you to do that. Good at portraiture, good at low light photography, good at car photography, and being a prime lens meant that I could get sharp photos with this camera. So this seemed like the obvious natural choice to go for when deciding on my third camera lens. So after that, I threw all my toys out the pram and I completely stepped away from Nikon. I switched to Sony. I got the A7R4, which was my dream camera, and I paired it up with none other than the 24-70 f2.8 lens from Sigma. So this is the art lens, which allowed you to shoot at f2.8 throughout whichever focal range you want. If you want to shoot wide at 24mm and shoot f2.8, you can. Or if you want to shoot at 70mm f2.8, you also can. It is the most versatile lens, and in my opinion, pretty much the best lens that you can get if you want a one lens to do everything. So back to the theme of this video, what lens and camera do you need when you very first start out? And I don't think that you can get the answers unless you start asking the right questions. And the questions that I would recommend that you ask, I'm just going to check my notes to make sure I get them right, is what types of photography are you planning on doing? You know, depending on what you need the camera for, it's going to dictate what you need for your setup. If you want to shoot motorsports, then you're going to need a zoom lens. If you're only going to be shooting portraiture, then you're not going to want a zoom lens, you're going to want a prime lens of some kind. Alternatively, if you're shooting insects, then you need a macro lens. So that's the first big question that you need to ask. Number 2 is going to be, how important is the camera body in relation to the lens? Are the photos just going onto Instagram, or are they going onto billboards? Are you printing them out? Are they going on websites? Are you getting paid clients, or are you just doing this as a hobby? These are all things that will determine how good of a camera you need, or whether or not you should put that money into a better lens. And the final thing is going to be number 3. Is the camera strictly for photography only, or do you want to do video? Because if you want to do video as well, then you need a camera that can actually shoot video. You need it to shoot either in 1080p or in 4K. These are the important questions that you need to know. So if you don't know these answers yet, then you probably need to stop looking at cameras and start figuring out what you actually need. If you're just starting out, I would probably recommend doing a 70-30 split. 70% of your money goes into the lens, 30% goes into the camera. If you've got £1,000 to spend, then 700 of that is literally going into the lens or lenses that you're going to be shooting with. You don't need to have the best camera body in the world. As long as it shoots in manual, you can change the shutter speed, the aperture, the ISO, and you can actually learn the fundamentals of photography. That camera body will probably do you just fine. I wouldn't recommend you go any lower than 24 megapixels, because in today's day and age, my camera from 10 years ago has 24 megapixels. So I feel like that's a good starting point. I wouldn't go any lower than that, but you can get some pretty good cameras that shoot at 24 megapixels for less than £300, let's be honest. Another thing that might be worth mentioning is, are you planning on sticking out with the camera brand that you're gonna buy? Because I obviously originally bought Nikon, I then switched to Sony, and now my 50mm lens, my 18-55 and my macro lens, they all don't work on my camera, and unless I buy adapters for it, they're not going to work on the camera. So I never use those camera gear items anymore. I literally just use my 24-70 and my A7R4. This is something you might want to think about, because if you're spending loads of money on all your camera gear, it's really inconvenient switching it all up in a couple of years. I've done it, but do you really want to do it? I think the final thing that I want to end this video on is that, yes, camera gear is important, but an amateur who's got the best camera in the world is going to be outclassed by a professional who's using the worst camera. And getting good with the gear that you can afford is the best way to take awesome photos. So if you haven't got a massive budget, don't let that put you off from getting started and actually getting your first few paid jobs. I believe Hamish got his first jobs when he was pretty inexperienced. Sorry to hate on you, Hamish, but I'm pretty sure you said that you bought this camera and you managed to get a couple of paid gigs pretty early on. So if that's you and you don't feel like you've got a lot of experience, get yourself a camera, get practicing with it, and once you know the fundamental basics of photography, start looking for some paid work, some little cash in hand jobs here and there, get some money in your pocket, then you can start upgrading your camera gear. Don't get put off by not having a massive budget to spend outright. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a comment down below, and all of that good stuff. Thanks for watching, and I think that is pretty much everything. If you do have any questions, leave a comment, obviously, or send me a message on Instagram. I'll be happy to help you out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.